You ask a simple question: what is the single most compelling piece of Zodiac evidence? And you mentioned the bloody fingerprint. It's the right question to ask. Because in a case with so much noise, so much performance and theatrics from the killer, you have to look for the signal. You have to look for the mistake. The letters, the ciphers, the phone calls, that was all part of the show. That was the Zodiac persona. It's what he wanted us to see. But the most compelling evidence is never what the killer wants you to find. It's what he leaves behind by accident. So, yes, it's the bloody fingerprint. It's not the only piece of evidence, not by a long shot, but it is the most powerful. It's the one piece that cuts through all the mythology. It grounds the case in the real physical world. It connects the phantom to the victim in the most direct way possible. To understand why, you have to go back to that night. You have to see the crime scene not as a chapter in a true crime story, but as a real place where a man lost his life. The date was October 11th, 1969. The city was San Francisco. A cab driver named Paul Stine picked up a fare near Mason and Geary, headed for Washington and Cherry in the wealthy neighborhood of Presidio Heights. It was his last fare. At the intersection, instead of paying, the passenger shot Paul Stine in the head. The shot was precise. It was an execution. But the killer didn't just flee. He lingered. This is important. He took his time. He moved into the front seat. He took Stine's wallet and his car keys. Then he did something that would become his signature. He took a piece of Stine's shirt, tearing off a large section from the back. He was collecting a trophy. This need for a souvenir required him to spend precious minutes inside the car with his victim. Around minutes where he was touching things. Across the street, some teenagers at a party looked out the window. They saw what was happening. They saw a man in the front of the cab leaning over the driver. They thought it might be a robbery or an assault. They called the police. They described the man as he was wiping down the cab, both inside and out. He was trying to clean up his mess. He was trying to erase his presence. Then he walked away casually up the street. The police arrived quickly, but a critical mistake was made. The dispatcher, in the confusion, broadcast that the suspect was a black male. So when two officers, Donald Fuke and Eric Zelms, saw a white man walking away from the scene, they just passed him by. They even had a brief exchange with him. They asked if he'd seen anything. He pointed them further down the street and kept walking. They had the Zodiac in their sights, and they let him go. They realized the mistake later, but by then he had vanished into the Presidio, a large, dark park nearby. Back at the cab, the investigation began. The scene was a mess of blood, and the killer, despite his efforts to wipe everything down, had failed. He was human, he was fallible. Police investigators processed the cab meticulously. They lifted several latent fingerprints from both the interior and exterior of the vehicle. Most were of no value, smudged or incomplete, but some were good, and one in particular was the prize. On the exterior doorposts, between the front and back doors on the driver's side, they found prints. These prints were left in blood. Paul Stine's blood. Think about what that means. The killer, with the victim's wet blood on his fingers, touched that part of the cab as he was getting out or closing the door. He tried to wipe the cab down, but in the dark, in his haste, he missed this spot. It was a direct physical link between the killer and the victim's body. It wasn't just a fingerprint. It was a bloody fingerprint. This is why it stands above everything else. Let's break down the other major pieces of evidence and you'll see the difference. Consider the Zodiac's letters and ciphers. They are the most famous part of the case. The taunting letters to the press, the complex codes, the cross-haired symbol. They are deeply compelling in their own right. They give us a window into the killer's psychology. His arrogance, his intelligence, his need for attention. The handwriting is distinctive, a mix of cursive and print. For years, handwriting analysis was a major focus. Document examiners compared the Zodiac's writing to samples from various suspects. But handwriting analysis is not a hard science. It's a subjective art. Experts can look at the same samples and come to different conclusions. A person can intentionally disguise their handwriting. Your own handwriting changes depending on if you're rushed, what pen you're using, or the surface you're writing on. It can be strong supporting evidence, but it can't on its own prove someone is the killer with the certainty of a fingerprint. It's a behavioral trace, not a biological one. It shows us the killer's habits, but not his identity. The ciphers are similar. They are a brilliant part of his game. The first one, the 408 symbol cipher, was cracked by a school teacher and his wife. It revealed the killer's rambling motive about collecting slaves for the afterlife. The infamous 340 symbol cipher remained unsolved for over 50 years until a team of private citizens finally cracked it in 2020. It was more taunting nonsense. The ciphers are fascinating puzzles. They prove the killer was intelligent and patient. But they don't contain his name. They don't identify him. They are part of the costume, the performance. They are a distraction designed to impress and terrify. They're not a mistake. Then there is the DNA. This seems like it should be the ultimate piece of evidence. In the modern era, DNA solves cold cases all the time, and authorities do have a potential DNA profile of the Zodiac. It was developed years ago from saliva traces found under the stamps and on the envelope flaps of some of the letters. The San Francisco Police Department even used this partial profile in 2000 to test their #1 suspect, Arthur Leigh Allen. The results came back negative. The DNA did not match Allen, but the Zodiac DNA is problematic. The profile is partial and it's weak. More importantly, the chain of custody for those letters is a nightmare. Think about a letter sent to a newspaper in 1969. It was handled by postal workers. It was opened by a mailroom clerk. It was passed to an editor, then a reporter. Then it went to the police, where it was handled by clerks, detectives, and lab technicians. Over the decades, it's been stored, retrieved, and retested. Any one of those people could have contributed DNA to the sample. Someone could have sneezed near it. A technician could have inadvertently touched the flap. We simply cannot be 100% certain that the DNA recovered belongs to the Zodiac. It might, but there is a reasonable doubt that will always hang over it. That doubt makes it less compelling than it seems. Compare that to the bloody print. The crime scene was fresh, the cab was sealed and processed within hours. The print was found in the victim's blood. The chain of events is clear and direct. Killer murders victim. Killer gets victim's blood on his hand. Killer touches the cab door. But police find the bloody print. There are no intermediaries. There is no question of contamination from a mailroom clerk 50 years ago. The link is pure. The eyewitness descriptions are also less reliable. The teenagers who saw the killer from across the street gave a description that led to the famous composite sketch. A man with glasses, a crew cut, a heavy build. But they saw him at night, from a distance, through a window. Officer Don Fook, who saw the killer up close, gave a slightly different description. He didn't mention glasses. He described a man with a shuffling walk. Eyewitness memory is famously fragile and unreliable. People misremember details, especially under stress. The descriptions are useful guides, but they aren't hard proof. And what about the print from the Berryessa attack, the one where Zodiac, dressed in a bizarre executioner's hood, tied up and stabbed Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard? He left a message on their car door. He also made a phone call to police afterward from a payphone in Napa. Police did lift the palm print from that phone. For a long time, this was considered another key piece of evidence. But here again, the connection is less certain. Was the print from the Zodiac, or was it from one of the countless other people who used that public phone booth that day? It's impossible to know for sure. It lacks the direct, violent context of the Stine print. So we come back to the bloody prints from the cab. They are the gold standard. They have a scientific certainty that no other piece of evidence in this case possesses. A fingerprint match is definitive. It's an identification. It's not a probability or an opinion. It's you. Your fingerprint is unique. If they match that print to a suspect, the case is, for all intents and purposes, over. So why hasn't it solved the case? This is the frustrating part of the story. The prints recovered were not perfect, full fingerprints. They were partial. Fragments of the full pattern of ridges and whorls. In 1969, matching partial prints was incredibly difficult. You needed a suspect in hand to compare them to. You couldn't just run it through a database because no such database existed. When Arthur Leigh Allen became the prime suspect, his prints were compared to the bloody partials. They did not match. For many, this cleared him. For others, it just deepened the mystery. The same was true for every other major suspect who came along. Their prints were checked. None matched. Today, we have the massive Office Database Automated Fingerprint Identification System. It contains millions and millions of fingerprints, but AFIS works best with complete, clearly rolled prints. It struggles with partials, especially ones lifted from a difficult surface like a painted car door over 50 years ago. The quality of the lift, the amount of detail present, it all matters. It's possible the Zodiac's prints have been run through the system and no match was found. It's also possible he was never arrested for anything serious, and his prints simply aren't in the system. There have also been arguments over the years that the prints might not even be from the Zodiac. Some have suggested they could belong to a responding police officer or a paramedic. This is a common defense tactic in criminal cases to muddy the waters around forensic evidence, but it doesn't hold up well here. The scene was processed by experienced technicians who would have taken elimination prints from all authorized personnel at the scene. Furthermore, the print was in wet blood. It's highly unlikely an officer would have accidentally put his hand in the victim's blood and then touched the outside of the cab in that specific way without noticing or reporting it. The simplest explanation is the most likely one. The man who killed Paul Stine left the print. The power of this evidence is that it is still waiting. It's a time bomb sitting in an evidence locker in San Francisco. DNA degrades over time. Memories fade. But a latent fingerprint, properly lifted and preserved, is forever. The ridges are still there. The pattern is still unique. Technology continues to improve. New algorithms and imaging techniques are being developed that can do more with less. What was an unmatchable partial print in 1969 or 1999 might become a matchable print tomorrow. This is the ultimate check and balance on any theory about the Zodiac's identity. In recent years, a group of independent investigators claimed to have solved the case, naming a man named Gary Poste as the killer. Their evidence was circumstantial, based on tenuous connections and speculative photo comparison. But they lacked the one thing that would make their case undeniable: a fingerprint match. If they are right, then Poste's prints should match the bloody partial from the cab. Until that happens, it's just another theory. The fingerprint is the final arbiter of the truth. It's the gatekeeper. Think of it like this. The letters and ciphers are the Zodiac's myth. They are the story he told about himself. The DNA is a modern hope, but one plagued by uncertainty. The eyewitness accounts are fleeting human memories. The bloody fingerprint is none of these things. It is the killer's biology. It is the one true, unscripted, undeniable piece of himself that he left behind. It wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't a taunt. It was a mistake made in the dark on a San Francisco street, a moment of carelessness after a moment of extreme violence. It represents the Zodiac's moment of greatest vulnerability. In that moment, he wasn't a supervillain or a master cryptographer. He was just a man with blood on his hands, trying to get away with murder, and he messed up. He left a clue that has outlasted him. A clue that doesn't care about his ego or his games. A clue that simply states, "I was here." All the other evidence allows for debate. We can argue about handwriting styles. We can question the source of the DNA. We can debate the meaning of the ciphers, but we can't argue with a fingerprint. It is a silent, objective witness. It has been waiting patiently for more than half a century. It's the most compelling piece of evidence because it holds the most promise for a final, definitive answer. Now, it's not just a clue, it's the potential end of the story.